Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Roots Matter, where news, politics, social justice, and secularism collide. I am your host, Cynthia McDonald, and thank you for joining us live. I thank everyone who is able to join us on Jesus Zombie Day. It's really great that you guys are here. Please make sure that before we are getting started with our show, that you like this video. Subscribe to The Roots Matter. Also, make sure that you are sharing the video on your various platforms and make sure that you are commenting live and also even after the show is over because the video will still be available for you to watch and to share, and commenting to keep the conversation going will also assist reaching more and more people so that we can trick the YouTube algorithm. So, you guys, I am super excited about having this conversation today. I have two special guests that's going to be joining me very shortly. But before I actually have them come on, I want to give a brief introduction to both of them so that you can be more familiar and also make sure that you are following them and getting more information, because today, or this evening shall I say, I know that I'm going to be a student and I'm here to learn, and I hope that you who are joining us are going to be doing the same. So my two guests who's going to be joining me is Mary Byler and Briana Stoltzfus. And Mary and also Briana grew up Amish. Mary specifically grew up Amish in 5 different communities, and Briana grew up Amish Mennonite. So Mary was born and raised in 5 different Amish settlements. Since 2004, they have actively pursued writings and other interests such as painting and engaging diverse experiences that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to explore within the confines of their Amish homes. As an educator and an advocate for Amish children, they collaborated with other organizations and agencies to provide research supported and evidence based resources for Amish plain communities and survivors. Today, nature, exploring, coffee, my favorite, friends, and family are a great source of comfort and joy in their life. They also find comfort in creating various art projects, such as their rebellious, prideful dress, and they wore to queer prom in 2023. Brianna is an adoptee and advocate speaking out on the realities of adoption within Amish Mennonite communities. She shares her lived experience to bring awareness to trauma, identity, and systemic gaps. Her work centers on truth, accountability, and protecting future children. Everyone, please help me welcome. Oh my God, I am blank. Here I am. Hey, everybody.
Hi, hello.
Hey, I'm so happy that you guys are here today. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation concerning American colonialism, especially when it comes to the Amish community and also race and all the intersections that happen with that, including your own personal stories. This is going to be something that is very rich to me because, of course, this is not my lived experience. And I always enjoy listening to stories and experiences of other people who happen to live outside of communities that are different from my own. I like to learn basically. And I'm really happy that you guys are here.
Thank you for having us.
Oh,
Absolutely.
it's my absolute pleasure. In actuality, the pleasure is all mine. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started while I'm asking questions to you. Mary, I'm coming to you first. So, you mentioned that you've lived in 5 different Amish settlements. How did those environments differ, and what stayed consistent across all of them?
Well, that's a really big question. I would say what stayed consistent is like their confessions of faith, which is this booklet. I don't know if you can see it well,
Mm.
but it's called Glaubens Bekenntnis. Like they originated their practices from that. Regardless of how they enacted them, they were rooted in that specific doctrine. The other part is that there are many different types of Amish. Like there's Byler Amish, Troyer Amish, Old Order Amish, New Order Amish. There's the Schwarzentroober Amish, the Nutter. Oh my God, that's such a derogatory term. Like, how do you translate Nutterella, Brie?
Oh, I'm not the one for that. That's
Like, there has to be a translation for it. But
The only one I know to ask is Chat GPT. But
okay,
continue.
but Nutterella, it's kind of like I don't know. It's a derogatory term in
it
Michigan.
is very derogatory. That's why I'm not sure how to find the language for that. Yeah.
But we would call like specific types of Amish, like some sports and trooper churches were called Nutterella by other types of Amish. Um,
Mm,
there's a lot of judgment. We don't just judge people that are not Amish. We judge each other very
Correct.
harshly.
mm.
And
Your group is the way. You know what I mean?
it's my way
Mhm.
or the highway, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and what was consistent is that mentality. It was consistent across all 5 of those communities. The
Wow.
other thing that was consistent across all 5 of those communities is so a settlement is a geographical location, and within a settlement you can have different types of Amish, and then depending on the population size of the type of Amish, you can have different church districts.
Mhm.
And with
Mm,
each church district, you will have ministry assigned to that church district. And then that ministry has special meetings twice a year. They just had one. Today's their communion church, which is right after they redid the rules letter, because the bishop of each church district goes back to the home church and rewrites their rules letter. And some of the dumbest things that I've ever heard of being written out of the rules letter is the type of fabric that women use for 10 years to make their dresses.
Mhm.
well, can
And
you use mixed
and
fabrics or no? Or how's that
well, it
work?
depends on the flavor of Amish you are and how these men in charge, because men decide all the rules about your bodies.
Of course.
You
Mhm.
know, the style of dress, the width of the hem on your dress, the width of the apron, the belt on your apron on your dress,
Mm,
the type of fabric you can use, the
mm.
style of dress you make. Like, I know Amish people that they weren't allowed to buy bras, but they were required to make their own bras.
Mhm.
Oh,
And
wow.
they
Yeah.
called it a brassiere because
Mhm.
A
we're
brassiere. Well, I like the way that Bette Midler called it the over the shoulder boulder holder,
Oh
to be
I
honest
like
with
that.
you.
I know that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And then another thing was we rode around in horses and buggies in all of those settlements. Um,
Mm,
women had varying types of head coverings. The styles of head coverings were different in each settlement that I lived in. Some of them were similar to each other, but they were very different. We could tell where somebody was from by the style of head covering they wore.
Mhm.
that is interesting.
Absolutely.
They had head coverings that was indicative to the community and the geographic location of that
And the
community.
sect
Absolutely.
and the sect of Amish.
Wow.
And then another thing is I spoke Pennsylvania German. That's my first language. We spoke a specific dialect inside of each type of Amish. I would say that 4 of the settlements were pretty similar, and one of them rolled their R's. They were really different. They
Mhm.
would the dialect that they speak. I can speak it if I want to, but I
Mm,
don't typically speak it because that's not my most preferred dialect,
Mhm.
mm,
and I
mm-hmm.
can understand it.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And
I I know that like in even in English, depending on where you are from would also basically determine the kind of English that you speak,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So, like, of course, like here in America, we have like a distinctive like English that is different from England. My family on my mother's side is from Jamaica, so they speak patois.
Mm-hmm.
And and they kind of go back and forth between like speaking like English to the point where you understand all the words, you just have like an accent, to speaking patois, which it almost sounds like a different language because you have so many different things that are actually colored and added, like, you know, some are West African words, some are Spanish words, some are French words that happen to um creep into the dialect, and then they speak it to each other, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's what we're saying right now. um I understand very little of it because that was not the preferred dialect that was actually spoken in my house, you know, because I'm here in America, right?
Mhm.
But
Mm-hmm.
you know, but of course, like I would hear others who were like, you know, my mom and my grandmother and my grandfather and some of my other, you know, progenitors that came, you know, before them, speak it to with one another, and I would actually listen to it, but they never spoke it to me. But it's very interesting how like communities still develop those particular dialects based on language that is very insular to the geographic location that they happen to be in at that particular moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
There's
interesting.
more similarities and differences though,
Hmm.
if we have time for that. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
because in several of the settlements that I lived in, we were allowed to have tractors. In other settlements, it was an absolute no. And in one settlement, they just took tractor engines and they would take them off the tractor and put them on four steel wheels and a wooden platform because we don't own tractors. But
Mhm.
and in fact, I've even known Amish people that ride their tractors to town because they don't want to hire somebody and pay somebody to drive them
Mhm.
to town, and they don't want to hitch up the horse and buggy to drive to town. So that's just some very interesting things. Um, Another thing is there are Amish people that have electricity, like they have solar panels in their home, they have indoor plumbing.
Mhm.
Personally, we all had, all five of these settlements had outhouses. We did not have indoor plumbing, and we did not have bathrooms. We didn't have showers. Um, we didn't have hot running water in our homes.
Mm.
We did have cold water that was piped into the houses though. And we would
Mm-hmm.
take baths like once a week on Saturday evening before church on Sunday in the basement. And it was usually heated up in a wood um, kettle. We called it a kessel. And it had a wood fire underneath it. It was like a big, huge, like 10-gallon, yeah, thing. It was a big deal. And then,
Yeah. Well, you had to do that because you had to be clean for Jesus. You
of
understand?
course,
Of
uh,
course. Yes,
you're a
exactly.
woman.
Makes perfect sense.
Had to be clean for Jesus, but you pack all these people into our homes to have church every 2 weeks, and then we're all packed like sardines, and we're sitting there, and it's like 100 degrees, and we don't have AC because
Oh,
that's
okay.
going too much. That's just
Oh
going
my
too far
God.
now. Okay, okay, but
I
sure, we
I
were
could just
clean,
I
clean
could
for
just think
Jesus.
of myself as a woman of a certain age that's like going through different changes that would
Mhm.
I would pass out and probably die. I already know.
You already know. Okay, well, I got more. I got more.
Oh, okay.
In some of the settlements that, like in one of the settlements that I lived in, um, I know that they now have cell phones for business.
Oh.
All of the settlements I lived in, they had access to phones. Even if
Mm.
they weren't allowed to own a phone, they had access to phones. So, with that being said, let's talk about that for a moment. Um, what that could look like is some settlements they outright purchased a phone line and a phone shanty, and then everybody in the community used it. Other people, they would purchase a phone line and a phone shanty and put it in the neighbor's name because then we don't own it. Semantics, my friends, they matter.
Oh, well, you know,
And
it's kind of like cherry picking with Christians, you know, like we're gonna follow this, not necessarily this. because reasons,
and
and that makes it okay.
and like honestly, like the education, all of the settlements I went to, they had a school board. They had pretty much there's a church approved curriculum.
Mm.
And that church approved curriculum, like we had a teacher that once was put into bond and removed from her teaching position, which I write about in my first book, by the way.
Mm.
If you want to understand more about the similarities and differences between those five settlements, I could talk for over an hour just about this, but I'm going to try to cut it after one more thing
Right,
after
because
the
we still need to
education.
bring Bree into the conversation.
Right. I'm all over here. I'm
No, I'm
sorry.
just happy to be
But,
here. I'm good.
but with that being said, like the church controlled the education. Now I know that
Mm.
there's certain types of Amish where they have the steering committee and they have other authorities that kind of try to govern the education, but there's also Amish that don't cotton to that. We even had our own publisher called Pathway Publishers that some Amish use their school books in school. Other Amish wouldn't be caught dead with them. They'd be like, oh hell no, we don't do that. We don't send like
Mm.
those Amish over there.
Mhm.
Wow.
So
So okay, so just to get this understanding. The in these particular communities, they, and I think that you mentioned this earlier, was okay, well, they speak the truth, but they don't speak the truth, or
right,
we can deal with these people but not with these particular people, even though like all of you all are considered Amish.
right.
There's they make distinctions.
We have an actual phrase about that. It's called Medina net mitnono. What that means is we don't fellowship with one another. We don't
Oh.
even like we wouldn't even there were certain people that were ordained in the ministry in certain types of Amish that would come visit when there was a wedding or a special church service, or they'd just come to visit. And they wouldn't even be recognized as ministry because Medina net mitzi, because we don't
Wow.
fellowship with them.
Mhm.
I see one of my good girlfriends in the chat, and this kind of reminds me when I was more active in the church back in the day. There was a similar sentiment amongst, like, churches about, like, we don't fraternize with everybody because not everybody is, like, preaching like the proper gospel. They don't always preach holiness. They don't always teach according to biblical principle that we consider correct. And so, and matter of fact, it was kind of interesting. I remember with the church that both me and my friend belonged to. I remember being told when I asked, "Do you fellowship with other churches that happen to be in the town that we were in at the time?" I was told no, because uh, the mindset of the leaders were reprobate, or they were too small, or they were not completely endowed with the calling of the Holy Spirit, or whatever type of excuse that they came up with at that particular moment in time. And therefore there was like very little fraternization. And I think that I remember going to one church where they were invited to where the leadership was invited to preach. Um, and and I remember us coming back to our church at the time, and they were telling, they were basically ripping that other church apart about everything that they did wrong during that service and why they are not as successful as they should be because reasons.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that that sentiment of, well, we're right, right, and those others in that community or in that structure is wrong,
Hmm.
and 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 therefore because we're right, because we said so,
Uh-huh.
we cannot fraternize with the others in those other communities because
we have the one true belief. We
because
have
we
the
have the
one
one true
true
belief. Yes.
interpretation of theology.
Yes.
The
Yes.
way that we interpret and apply this doctrine is the one right way. And
Mm. Mm-hmm.
that's the only way. And if you, I was taught and I heard this preached, it's like if you go out into the world, you're going to be living a loose life because you
Mm-hmm.
are given a sacred covenant, if you will, by
Mm-hmm.
God, because God let you be born Amish. And
Mm.
I think I want Bree to weigh in on that when she talks about her life experiences.
Yeah,
But
yeah, Bree, let's get you here. Let's get you in here. Because I have questions specifically for you because you happen to be a person of color who
Mhm.
was, raised in a community, similar to this. So, can you talk about as an adoptee within the Amish Mennonite context?
Mhm.
When did you begin to understand that your story was different from the community that you happened to be brought into?
Yeah, so looking over the questions you sent me, I felt like that was actually one of my favorite questions because I don't think there was one specific moment. I think that that was shown to me in a lot of different moments. It was being
Mm,
the only half black kid, if you will, that because that's how they referred to me. So I was adopted into a family that adopted six of us and had legal guardianship of four others, and I was the most light skinned. And
mm,
so because of that, um, I was treated better. Like it was like there was like a sliding scale when it came to the treatment of me and my adopted siblings. So I was treated better based off of the fact that I was lighter. But then the second that they saw my afro, it was like the scale just went, you're. So lucky for me, on Sundays and Wednesdays, when they would see me in service, I had like a half a tub of gel in my hair to pull it back under that veil, right? But then the
uh-huh.
second that I was at like any type of like creek event, right, and my hair got wet, it was like I would literally see the disgust on their faces. They'd be like, oh, like she really is black. You know what I mean? So I
Wow.
would say that I saw a lot of emphasis on color. That would have been the first thing that gave me a clue to like, oh, hey, my experience within this people group is not the same as someone born into it, for sure. And I was paralleling that with like my adopted cousins, right? Like my cousins that were Amish that were born into the community versus me being adopted in. Yeah.
Hmm. That is so interesting. I know that like colorism is something that introduce that is very much so real and exists on all types of spectrums, no matter what type of like community you happen to be in. But
Exactly.
however, it's very interesting where you have a family group who specifically adopted you
Hmm.
and adopted, others who happen to be people of color.
Yeah.
And still there was, and even though that you have like these ideas of acceptance that, Christianity espouses, um and this is the idea that has happens to be espoused specifically within these groups because Amish people, as far as I was taught to me, are Christians, right?
That's what they say. Correct.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
But as far as like practice goes,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah. So that was
different.
like my most cognitive memory that I have surrounding being like, wait, this something's not lining up here from like a spiritual standpoint versus a real life, like a real lived experience standpoint, was
Mm,
hearing the pastor of the church talk about God and love and how we're supposed to love our brother like Jesus, da 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 da, right? And
mhm.
then directly after church, hearing my siblings that were darker than me, skin tone wise, being called the N word with the hard R by the pastor's sons and being
Wow.
discluded from games on the church playground because we were too fast because we were black. And I remember being like 10 years old and coming home from one of those services and actually questioning my Amish Mennonite adoptive parents and being like, hey, we're being taught this, and yet this is what we're experiencing. And they had no answers for me. And I would say from there on out, it was like, it was a spiral for me. Yeah, the faster I could get out, the
Wow.
better. Yeah.
Wow. That is that's interesting. Like it's funny. Like have you both heard of the term church hurt?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I say something about the N word?
Yes, please.
I just want to make it very, very clear that we even have the N word in our own language.
Thank you. I was hoping that you were going to
And
add to that,
I
Misfit.
want to
Mm,
point this out really quickly because people have been very pressed when I say this. This is a Pennsylvania German dictionary. It is
mm,
called Rouse Pennsylvania Dutch Handbook. It was published in the late 1800s. 1879 is when it was
mm,
published. You can
mm,
literally get a free copy on Google Books
mm.
where it is documented.
Mm.
So if you want to think that we don't have a way of saying it, oh, we do. And we do. I grew up listening
I
to
was just going to
people
say yes.
call people like Bree the N word. Not
Yeah.
even just that, when I went to the store with my mother in Western PA, there was a
Mm.
black woman that was a cashier, and she wouldn't even take money from her hand. She put the money down on the counter
Wow.
because we can't take money from black people. And then she made the cashier put the money down on the counter instead of taking it from her hand.
Wow.
That is how it is written in these articles, how to shun people. So even though this cashier had never been Amish, had never had anything to do with the Amish, she engaged in that specifically
Yeah.
because she was black.
Yes.
So,
And Misfit, were you raised under the same belief system that I was? So my adoptive father originated from the Old Order Amish out of Honeybrook, Pennsylvania, and then my adoptive mother originated out of the New Order Amish out of White Horse Gap, Pennsylvania. And so we saw the differentiations there that Misfit was describing earlier with like no rubber on the tractor tires. That's how my adoptive father would have been raised, right? And so with that in mind, I was raised under the belief system that colored people's blood differently. I have had German Bible verses quoted to me by my Amish people. Misfit, can you add to that about our
Yeah,
blood?
because they used the story of the guy. Oh my God, I never can remember his name, but they used the story of the guy in the Bible. Um, and he went in and he saw his father's shame, and
Think,
so he was
yes,
cursed.
that
They
one. Yep.
use that as justification for
Yeah, they will
acting.
deny me services. Like there's certain stores I can't go in locally based off of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also a mentality. I want to be very clear. There's a mentality, and it is now documented by multiple non practicing Amish people that they were taught this specifically, that the darker a black person is, the more likely they are to commit crimes. I myself was riding on a bus, a Greyhound bus, by the way,
mhm.
with my mother, and there was a lot of conversation about, oh, you got to stay away from that black person. They're so dark.
Mm.
They're bad.
Mm.
I mean, I mean, to be honest with you, that's a general sentiment, even outside of that community,
Mm.
this idea of that, black people are more inherently criminal, and
Mm-hmm.
also because colorism is very much so apparent, along with racism. And also when we think about the tropes that have been propagandized about black people all around the world, that you know it's already thought of within the
Yes.
general populace that, hey, these black people, especially the darker ones, they are more than likely to steal from you, to kill from you,
Mm-hmm.
to violate your daughters or whatever they come up with, and therefore they should be targeted in order for them to be arrested and put into jail. I
So,
mean,
Cynthia,
yeah.
may I ask you, do you feel like that generalization that you're referencing, right? Because that is obviously very real. Do you feel like pair that with a spiritual, religious rhetoric, narrative, belief system, logic, if you will? What
Mm,
do you think that does? Because that was my experience. Because I
mm,
the Amish and Mennonites that I come from love to say things to me like, Bree, you're going to experience racism and stereotyping everywhere. Da, da, da. And I'm like, yes, but not through the lens of the spiritual BS. Because respectfully, that's what made it worse to me, right? Because you're being taught one thing, but then
mhm.
to live the opposite.
I will say this, Bree, because I kind of did like some research concerning this whole topic when it comes to religion, especially Christianity, and how it comports with blackness, right?
Okay.
And I even did a speech about it. It's on my channel. Check
Oh
it
my
out.
gosh, send
Black
me
folks, white
everything
religion.
after this.
Right.
Send
It's
me
on my channel. Black
everything.
folks, white
Thank
religions.
you.
Yes, yes, please watch it. But one of the things that happened in the United States specifically is that the ideas concerning slavery from the Bible were very much so pushed and used on how to treat slaves in the United States. And I'm pretty sure, no, I am sure that those ideas also were utilized with slaves in other countries as well, like the
Mhm.
Caribbean, Central America, and also South America.
Correct.
Basically, all slaves that happened to be subjugated to through the Middle Passage, through the transatlantic slave trade, and then dropped off to their various places in the West. Now, specifically here in the United States, they had what they call a slave Bible, and the slave Bible specifically took out any references of freedom, of or any type of liberation, or any of those different things that would give slaves the idea that they could actually live a free life and Jesus will be okay with it, right? And they push more so Levitical law that we can find in like Leviticus and Deuteronomy and whatnot. Left out the stuff in Exodus because
Mhm.
remember that's when the slaves were freed from Egypt
Correct.
by God through Moses and Aaron,
Mhm.
and also use a lot of the references in the New Testament, specifically from Paul through the letters of Philemon,
Mhm.
Ephesians, and Colossians that basically told people to obey your masters, right?
Mhm.
And it was also very much so preached, from these slave Bibles and also from white preachers who happen to be in these settings where you're teaching basically,
So it's coming
slaves.
from a whole host of different.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yes.
most definitely, most definitely. Honey, mommy's recording right now. Mommy's recording right now. I'll play with you after I'm done. Thank you. Um, don't forget to close the door. Thanks. So,
That's so
hey,
weird.
hey guys, I'm a mama.
If you
Anyway,
see me making faces, it's at my kids. Don't even.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm just making faces at my kid, but they definitely, used the pulpit, the bully pulpit, in order for them to, push this propaganda, especially to slaves, on what your lot in life is. So there was this idea of the theology that I like to reference Annie Laurie from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, because this is one of the first times I heard this particular saying, you know, get the pie in the sky when you die. So basically, be a good slave, obey your masters,
Mm.
serve them very well, and then you will receive your reward in heaven.
Mm.
And even though you had, like, during the civil rights movement, a push for liberation doctrine, where they were really trying to utilize more of the liberation aspects of the Bible to say these are the reasons why Black people are supposed to have civil rights. They still leaned on this notion that, even though you're persecuted and you may even lose your life because of rough, because of you having to go fighting through, like, these different channels in order for you to receive the liberation here, in your nation.
This is so
That
interesting to
I,
me.
I mean, well, I mean, but I find it interesting because there is definitely a correlation
Oh,
between
a
these
thousand percent.
communities, that may have even existed outside of, Amish people, and actually, within the nation itself,
Mm-hmm.
because because, like, regardless of whether, you happen to be in a more insular community, right,
Mm-hmm.
and had these different experiences, it did not stop the ideas of institutional, systemic, and also personal biases when it came to Black people. And I mean, like, for you talking about like having your own version of the N word
Yeah.
written down
No,
in
it's crazy.
dictionaries, right?
Mhm.
And you
Or
want to know what's even crazier?
yeah, yeah.
The first time I made a little video clip talking about it,
Hmm.
people threatened to sue me for saying that. And I was like,
Mhm.
good luck, bring it on.
I mean, but it's
Mhm.
written down, like,
Like, I,
but the
it's
book says
Like,
this.
what do you want me to do with this?
like, what do you, I can't make it
Right.
up. This is the
Right.
truth.
It's
Like,
it's there. I mean, like, yeah, it's almost like, like, um the dear leader in the White, who's occupying the White House right now. One of the first executive orders that he came out with was this Truth and Sanity Act, where it was basically a whitewashing of, the Black experience in the United States. They wanted to pull some of the exhibits that came out of the Smithsonian that talked about slavery. They wanted to basically push an agenda where they would defund schools that actually talked about indigenous genocide and also slavery. And they wanted to also take down different monuments that happen to exist in national parks that marked the Underground Railroad,
Mhm.
where slaves escaped to freedom, and all of this is part of American history. However, because we don't want to necessarily show that, remember, like, what MAGA means, make America great again, that America wasn't always great. And I would beg to differ that it is now.
Clock that.
So like, because we don't necessarily want to acknowledge our past and also some of the past atrocities that we have done against other people, that we rather just go ahead and just sweep it under the rug and not talk about it.
Hmm. Mm-mm-mm.
okay.
Hmm.
Would you like my take on, like, part of the,
Please, that's
I was
I
taught.
need all of that. I need
Let
all of
me
that.
let me tell you something. I was taught in
Yes.
this little booklet called, it's a little book. I have it here somewhere. Oh, it's on my bookshelf. Never mind. But it's a book called In Minor Jugend. And In Minor Jugend, I read as a teenager. It's written in High German and English. Now it's published by Pathway. It has the Glaubensbekenntnis, which is the Confessions of Faith. It has
Mhm.
the Apostles' Creed. And then it has Rules of a Godly Life, and they're one of the things they talk about in the Rules of a Godly Life is how birds of a feather flock together. And I
Wow.
actually feel like that might be true. Because if we
Mm,
don't learn, if we don't know our history,
yeah.
hasn't humanity shown, hasn't it been documented in our
Mhm.
history books that we're doomed to repeat the same things?
Oh. Oh,
So when
yes.
we don't address it, when my great whatever
Mhm.
grandparents came to, and I'm gonna tell you this because we have history. Amish are
Hmm.
obsessed with genealogy. We are
Mhm.
obsessed with it. We're an ethnocentric group, by the way,
Mhm.
Hmm.
except for people like Bree who are adopted in. And
Mhm.
I've always said this is the people at the lowest of the low. When you think about people having privilege and you have this ladder, there's the people who
Mhm.
come from good families, there's people who are wealthy,
Oh
affluent,
yeah.
people who inherited land or they bought land in Lancaster County, PA. For example, I looked up land and I found 13 and a half acres of land in Lancaster County, PA today for sale for $1.5 million. And there's
Wow.
a whole story about this. So
Mm.
my ancestor, this is my ancestor, Jacob Byler, who came to Philadelphia in 1737. In
Mm.
this book, he was given land grants. How did he obtain that land? And where do people get off on telling me that Amish people didn't participate in
Mm.
colonizing
You, I
America?
was just about to pivot there. I was just about to pivot there. Please continue.
In this book, there are multiple sections where they talk about hundreds and hundreds of acres of land that were given to Amish people. In
Mm.
fact, in the Mennonite Historical Society in Lancaster County, PA, there's a whole thing documented where William Penn went to Europe to specifically invite Anabaptists to come to Pennsylvania to
Mm.
flee religious persecution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So he invites them there after he buys this land from the indigenous people. Where were the indigenous people supposed to go? And how were they
Mm.
supposed to sustain life when their land was taken from them? And that's how they obtained the resources they needed to exist.
So was it bought or fought?
Some of it was bought, some of it was homesteading. There is a story in one of the books that talks about an Amish family living in a dugout. And there's also an orally passed down story of Amish people that actually fought indigenous people.
Mm.
So,
Wow.
with that being said, some Lancaster County Anabaptists pride themselves very much on Lancaster County, PA was given to them by William Penn, and it is their right, if you will. But
It,
where did
it,
that generational wealth come from?
yeah. Yeah. It's so when you talk about homesteading, I the first thing that comes to my mind is the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, is this like the homesteading that precedes that?
And it started before even 18, it started even before that.
Oh,
We
yeah.
were taking land from indigenous people
Mhm.
even before that act happened.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So I
Wow.
want to know how you can say to me that Amish people did not participate in colonization, because I've had people tell me that.
If you're taking that, this is one of the reasons why I push back so much concerning immigration, because it's to me it's like, how can you tell a person who comes here that they're, even though, like, I still toe a line between, borders and all this other stuff, but at the same time, if you're telling a person specifically here that they're coming here, and if they come through a different route that you're not particularly liking, that, oh, you're illegal, you need to go back to where you came from, yada yada yada. But when we look at the story of America and of itself, America is on stolen land.
And
Mm-hmm.
I am an 11th generation born in America person. Like, that's what I am, because my ancestors were immigrants.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So, who am I to say that
Mm-hmm.
immigrants should not come into this country?
Right.
And when we have this narrative about the persecution of our ancestors, there's a whole story about this. We have a book called The Bloody Theater of the Martyrs' Mirror, where our martyrs were put to death in Europe and we were fleeing persecution. I know full well there's handed down oral history that talks about people who entered America in ways that were other than perfectly legal. So
Right.
why would I sit here and judge people for, or even say that people are unworthy of human rights just because they came to America in a different way than other people did?
Yeah, exactly. Now I want to, now this is not on my question list that I sent to you guys, but I just thought about it since we are within this conversation concerning um homesteading, taking land, and had generations of people who happen to stay on this land where they can possibly earn millions of dollars just by the sale of this land, and so that they basically inherited generational wealth. How did and I know that, like, black folks per se were not in totality part of the like these particular communities, right? But I'm very curious to know about how Amish communities related to to slavery, or what they even thought about it.
Let me go here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever read anything that I've written in chapter 2 of my book called Jezebel's Justice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to read a part to you because I feel like it's appropriate, and it'll
Mm-hmm.
give you a background and a preface because I have a story about my ancestor Jacob Hofstadter that is very well documented, and then I have a story about the Civil War.
Mm.
But
Okay.
I want the audience to understand this. Um, One way the Amish benefited from colonialism was by coercing and forcing indigenous people to give them their babies. For example, some of my friends have experienced this, and that's not just one person, but it is an example. We stole their children. We also hear stories about Amish taking in poor indigenous children. The descendants of indigenous children that become Amish are often told stories about these ancestors in a positive light. Their ancestor became Amish, and remaining Amish was a good thing. I have a friend who, in the 1970s, was pretty much sold to a bishop, and she is indigenous. So when you think about that, now think about this whole story about my ancestor. Which came first, Jacob Hostetler or the Civil War? Does it matter? I don't think it does. Anyways, so Jacob Hostetler is my ancestor. In this book, look, I have all these books. This book, this book, this book, this book, and my big, big family book. They all have an accounting of this story. Now, the oral story that I grew up with is that there were, and they use the term Indians, by the way. I want
Yeah.
people to understand that. I don't use that term, but to understand this,
Mhm.
they have the story written with that term.
Yes.
And the indigenous people came by and they asked Barbara, the wife, for food. And she didn't give them food and turned them away. Later on that night, while everybody was sleeping, the indigenous people came back, and those evil people or bad people or what have you, and they called them redskins in
Mhm.
this in this published content as well.
Mm-hmm.
They murdered the children and the mother, and then took captive the father Jacob and his two sons.
I got
And then
dressed up as these Indians as a kid based off of this story for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Literally. It's
I
insane.
that
And we weren't allowed to be the people off the Mayflower because we weren't white. So
so
we role played.
oh, wow. Wait. So you're telling me that you were also carted off as far as like race is concerned, on who you could actually play within these particular stories.
1,000%. It was crazy.
Oh my gosh. Guys, you
Like when I
know,
say my when I like even say my experience out loud, I'm like, this is bonkers.
but it's because you were always known. You were labeled. First off, like you were labeled because of you were not white.
yeah.
Second off, you were labeled because your
Hmm.
hair didn't comply with the white people's demands. Third
Hmm.
off, you were labeled because you were not
Hmm.
born in.
Hmm.
Everybody that's not born in, we always knew about them. Like they talked about them
Yes.
incessantly. It was
Yes.
ridiculous. They label you. You are forever
Oh,
known
yeah.
as that. And back to my point about the ladder of privilege. So I talked about the generational wealth, and I think we kind of went down a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
at
yeah.
the very, you have your middle class people, but at the very bottom and the lowest of the low is anybody who was adopted in who happens to live with a
Mhm.
disability, and especially if they happen to be a person of color.
Yeah.
Mm. You Bree, I want you to expand on that because I'm wondering to myself as I'm sitting here, listening to the story and I'm listening to you and I'm listening to listen to Fee about this all this stuff that has, transpired and
Mhm.
And it's kind of interesting because at first I thought it was only the Mormons that was like obsessed with genealogy. I didn't know that the Amish were too, but thank you for informing me. I think that the reasoning maybe is slightly different, but still it's a thing, right?
Mhm.
But I'm wondering to myself, Bree, like growing up as an adoptee in the Amish Mennonite community,
Mhm.
when did you really start to break away from that so that you can find your own identity within your race and your ethnicity and really just like embrace what that means to you?
Yeah, so again, I feel like this is such a layered answer. And I say that because on the heels of this conversation about what it looks like to be a person of color within these isolated people groups, right? I think that that definitely influenced, if not, it spelled my fate out with these people. Like from the jump, I got sent to a girls' camp in South Carolina when I was 13 and a half years old,
Mm,
due to me reporting some abuse that I went through in that community, at the hands of a pastor's son. And so, right there, I think that gave me, while it was obviously a negative that I was being taken out of my home like that,
mhm.
I, it gave me the freedom to explore what it looks like to embrace my natural hair, to be accepting of my skin color. I mean, my fifth grade teacher would put sunscreen on prior to going out for recess. I was raised in an Amish beachy school, and she would put sunscreen on because she didn't ever want to be my skin color. Sorry, I'm having to plug my computer in because it's almost dying.
Oh yeah, don't
Okay.
do
So like
that.
I had to like deal with that type of thing. And then I would say beyond the girls' camp experience, when I graduated from the girls' camp and came back into my Amish Mennonite adoptive home and community, it wasn't even 3 months after that that I got excommunicated and actually went through the shunning and the bond process with the church I was raised in, and I ended up being homeless in the streets because these people were like, "Oh, we're done with you. You're out." And they did a raise of hands at a Wednesday night service to quote sell my soul to the devil. And again, I was only 15 years old when that went down. So I think all of those experiences combined is when I started to like just lean into myself more, right? And figure out my own identity and etc. Yeah.
Wow, that is first off, I just want to say that I'm so sorry that that happened to you. I I'm sorry guys, I'm a little lost for words right now.
May I?
Be, and the
I mean, it's
reason,
a mouthful. It's a mouthful, Cynthia. Did you
yeah.
hear the way I had to barge through it? Because I like psychologically black
I'm
out at times when I share my own experiences. I mean, you asked Misfit. I feel like I just started going public about some of the nuances of my personal lived experience with these people groups about 2 years ago on like
Mhm.
a very intimate level. And I credit Misfit for helping me define some of the language that I found. But I like what your banner says in your podcast, Cynthia, where it's basically like truth over everything. And that's kind of what I lead
that's
with, right? I'm like, this is my lived experience. I don't care what you're seeing on TV shows. I don't care what these people are trying to portray. Understand this is actually how it goes down.
I
And
want
I
to.
know this to be truth. One last thing, Miss Fit, then I'm gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
I one of my other core experiences with these people groups was going to something that was called adoption conferences.
Mm,
Hosted at this big like I don't know conference center that was ran by Anabaptists, and it was literally only Amish and Mennonite people that were into foster care and adoption. And they would 400, 500 people would gather. All of us mixed kids would be out on the parking lot playing games with like a 17 or 18-year old overseeing us. The parents would be inside the building being taught by a pastor, of which I found out, yeah, there's a lot. It's a whole can of worms. But, that's where these foster parents and adoptive parents were getting their education.
wow.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
so proud of you, Brie. I am literally so proud of you. I know how much you have worked to be able to speak and to speak
Yeah,
truth
because
to
they don't like
power
to
in
hear my
this
voice.
matter.
Mhm.
No, of course
Mhm.
they don't like to hear your
Mhm.
voice, but that's okay. You know your voice
Oh,
matters.
I'll,
They
to
don't
be
like.
honest, to be honest with you, I'm like, especially like when you're talking about people who are exacting harm. against others, you know.
Respectfully, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what it is. When you're shunning people, when you are assaulting people, when you are labeling them because of
Yes.
their race, because of their
Yes.
gender, because of how they present,
That's the
you
part for
know.
me. I'm like,
And
man, I
that's
didn't ask for any of this. Y'all brought me in here. What?
Yeah, exactly. So like you bring me into this community,
Mm-hmm.
and
And for what?
for yeah, for, you know, like, did you want the pat on the back to say, oh, good job, actually, like, you know, rescuing the black girl that actually came in this particular
actually,
community?
Cynthia,
Yeah,
I'm gonna say this. I
please.
don't care who you are, but if you are adopting black children to give yourself a pat on the back and to make yourself feel better about things, or even in some Amish communities, they have a norm of if you are childless, you lose status. So if you lose
Well, they
social
believe there's a
status,
hidden sin.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
or they believe there's a hidden sin. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you lose social status or you believe you are sinning and that's why you're childless, and then you
Mm,
go and buy children or you adopt children
Mm-hmm.
and you specifically do it with people of color and
mm.
you do this because it's going to benefit you, what is that called?
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Isn't there a term for that?
Mm.
I'm pretty sure
And
there is. It kind of escapes me right now, but yes, there is.
Can you know, can we talk about Sam Shetler for a second? Because
mm.
Yeah,
what is he being charged with? Oh, that pesky thing called slavery,
Trafficking.
trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
trafficking.
And
Hmm.
I mean, it's just really what it comes down to. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
the literal charge. And then there's also a sexual crimes charge. And then there's a charge of abusing a person who lives with a disability.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
there was there's I remember, like, there was another story. I didn't do it on the Roots Matter. I did it on another show where they were doing that specifically, adopting black children, abusing them, using them for slave labor,
Mhm.
and you know, keeping them in their homes, like tied up and things of
Like
that
in
nature,
inhumane conditions.
in
Mm-hmm.
very inhumane
Mm-hmm.
conditions. I think that one of the kids escaped to a neighbor's house and then ended up
Wow.
getting help, and that's the reason how they found out. But these
Wow.
people who adopted these kids were, you know, the way that they portrayed themselves as just like the upper echelon of everything, and they're just so good and just so wonderful, and everybody just like really said, oh, what,
Yeah.
look what you've done for the little Negro children, and you know, in your area, you just like basically, like, you know, help give them a brand new life that they
Oh
would have
yeah.
never had, you know,
Oh
with
yeah.
their other parents that birthed them in the first place.
Oh, heavy
And
on that narrative. What?
yeah,
That follows me to
heavy.
this day. I just ran into a practicing Amish lady at my chiropractor the other week, and she legitimately said to me, and I was shook. She was like, "Well, she's like, I'm sure your childhood with." I almost named my adopted parents on this platform. She's
sure.
because she knew them. She's like, I'm sure your childhood with them was much better than what it would have been otherwise.
Really,
Oh,
Oh, you
really.
mean like when they told me, when they trafficked me to my aunt and uncle, and they
right,
told me that,
right.
oh, well, why aren't you so happy that they took care of you? I was 9 years old and
And
they
I rest my
literally
case.
trafficked me for sex and labor.
Mm, mm, mm,
Yeah, she, jeez,
mm.
jeez, Louise. You know,
I'm just saying, I don't feel like they should be adopting any children of color
Yeah, that's
because,
why
in
I'm
my
pushing for
opinion,
reform.
they
yeah.
Mhm.
they are trafficking them and they are using them.
Yes.
And then you have Dr. Jeanette Harder, who has a PhD in social work services,
Mm,
and
Mm,
Bree knows all about this.
I sure do.
She published an academic journal paper, and let me be
mm,
very careful, but she has a PhD in social work services. She is a sitting professor at Goshen College, which is a
Mm.
Mennonite institution of higher education. I'm not going to talk about their educational, okay, whatever, whatever. But she
I mean,
published this
I feel like
article.
she said it with her chest, so I feel like you should be able to push back with your chest, but that might just be me. I don't
Okay,
know.
can
well,
I push back with my whole chest like Cynthia?
your whole chest, the
Cynthia,
whole chest,
this
please.
woman has single handedly legitimized patriarchal power
Very
and
harmful.
dominion of
Mhm.
plain women. And then
Mm,
she published Women and Children. And then
mm,
she published an article entitled Inviting Plain and Amish Families to Adopt and Foster Children. She minimizes the physical violence these foster children are subjected to
oh yeah.
and adoptees.
Oh
She
yeah.
she talks about children of color and race as if like they're commodities.
And then,
Mm.
like, what I feel her piece specifically did, and why it was just so triggering to me on a personal level, is like there's already not much room for adoptees' voices coming out of the Amish and Mennonite communities, right? Because
Mm.
of all of the preconceived stereotyping that is done by the people groups themselves, right? So you pair that with then a professor with a PhD with, mind you, no lived experience on it, speaking on it, those people groups leech on that they need that, it fuels what they have going on, right? So then someone like myself starts to speak out and people are able to hit me with that article. Yeah, it does no good, it does
Not
no
But
only that, she concludes in the article that it hasn't been enough time to
good.
pursue outcomes with the adoptees. We
Right.
literally have Josh Bechtel, who passed away, but he
Oh,
published
rest in peace.
entire books about being adopted by Mennonites.
Yeah, I miss his work.
There's all of these adoptees. I've had multiple adoptees who have been on my YouTube channel who have talked about their
but,
life
but they're
experiences.
so
There
discredited, Misfit. Mm-hmm.
mm.
Mm-hmm.
there's LaVasia, there's Shelley, there's Renee,
Mm-hmm.
I there's
This could go on.
all
but
the
but
list.
you but you guys got to understand something, that these people who would say and publish things that they call, you know, academic studies
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of times very much so colored in their own biases and
A
their
thousand percent.
own ideas of,
Mm-hmm.
because of the rhetoric that they particularly grew up with, and they just, oh, go ahead
Mm-hmm.
and take that and just put it in flowery
Mm-mm.
language, you
Mm-mm.
know. and
Mm-mm-mm.
and a lot of times, I mean, like, we've seen it so many times. Like, I think of, like, this whole push in the United States for eugenics, who had this, like, idea that because of the cranium of a black person is maybe smaller than a white person's, therefore they're less intelligent,
Mm.
or or having, the bell curve when it comes to, testing and labeling IQs, and they have, and oftentimes people who will come up with these particular tests, and they will take white people versus black people, and who oftentimes lived in very, very, very disparate communities,
Mm.
ask these questions, and because, like, like the black people, because of, like, being in the environment that they are, even like in some of, like, the educational systems that they were subjected to, may not have received a higher score than, like, some of the white kids who took it, and therefore it's going to color them as less intelligent or unable to learn or things of that nature.
Mhm.
And I mean, like, we've seen this story so many times over and over again, how these particular people who happen to be in academics and also are very much so colored by their own biases, their own prejudgments, their own, you
Mhm.
know, um, and inferences of the institutions that they happen to be part of, espouse basically white supremacist rhetoric, and
Uh-huh.
say
Mhm.
that it
Mhm.
it's
That's a
it's
great dissection.
yeah, I
That
mean,
is
but they say that it's white supremacist rhetoric,
Mhm.
but because I'm an academic, there's that, the fallacy of,
Thank you.
of the
Louder.
of actually being able to, speak from authority because I studied this. But I
Thank
mean, like I
you.
said, but like, if we were going to ask questions about, like, well, what were you taught? How
Mm.
did you
so
grow up? What type of communities were you part of?
Mhm.
Because, like, all that matters when
Yeah,
you
we need
are
to take back to the
making
basics. Mhm.
claims like this.
so
Mhm.
may I give you one more quote by
Yes, please.
Jeanette, our dear
Please
friend
do.
and sister in Christ, if he ever existed, Dr. Jeanette Herder.
Mm.
Amish are not often in the practice of employing abstract or critical thinking or even self reflection. She published that in an academic journal.
Wow. Repeat that again, please.
Amish are not often in the practice of employing abstract or critical thinking or even self reflection.
Wow.
That's a pretty damning
She
statement
said
for
that
using
with her
somebody's name.
full chest. She said
Wow.
that with her full chest. And when you're talking about people
That's
looking at
obsession.
Black people as less intelligent, may I share with you how I relate to that?
Mhm.
Mm.
It's the Dr. Jeanette Harders who don't speak our language. They're not culturally competent. They have sat there and published rhetoric that legitimizes the voices of practicing men who have positions of power and authority within the group, that
Go on.
furthers the agenda that allows and creates further opportunities to oppress and harm the most marginalized people within the community. It dehumanizes Amish people because it suggests that we're not capable of critical or abstract thought. It acts as if her idea is that people that do not speak English well, or maybe don't talk to her because we don't trust her, we know.
Mm-hmm.
I know practicing Amish women that are literally like, I would never talk to Jeanette Harder. She's not safe. Why would I talk to her?
Right,
Mhm.
especially when you already
We
have
know.
Appreciate.
and you've already, like, preceded
Mhm.
your own biases before you even had a conversation with
Crazy
me.
work.
Yeah,
Crazy.
and I mean, and to be honest with you, if we're really going to talk about, abstract thinking and critical thought, to be honest with you, no human being is in that particular default.
Mhm.
Thank
Nobody.
you.
That's
None.
not the organic state. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
that was just
And
malinformation.
then
Period.
And then you mentioned the education, misinformation, and lack of access to information.
Hmm.
Wisconsin versus Yoder is a 1972 Supreme Court ruling that justified child labor trafficking of Amish children
Mm.
Wow.
in lieu of going to high school. So
See.
I digress. I think my point is made in where I see that behavior. So,
Mm,
why are they continuing to do this? And how does this relate to racist ideology? How does
Mm.
this relate to their theology? And
mhm.
why are there people that literally tell me that Amish people are racist and Amish people didn't participate in colonizing America?
Mm.
Yeah. I you know I first off, I just wanted to really, thank both of you for, again, being here. This has been such a treat. I'm really glad that, we're having this conversation, because it's definitely not anything that is, like, talked about a lot.
Mhm.
I mean, I the only exposure besides, what I have seen in the media space to Amish people that I've had is going to college in central Illinois,
Okay.
where they did have some Amish communities set up, right? Um and I know that they were different from, maybe, from others, because, like, the Amish communities that I was familiar with in that area, they drove cars.
Were there?
They would drive to they purchase goods and things of that nature at Walmart. They and I know that, like, I think that one time that my mom picked me up from school, and she wanted to go to this town called Arcola, in central Illinois, because she specifically wanted to go to the Amish bake shop to purchase, baked goods, and also, like, some, and possibly look at some of, like, the knickknacks
Mm.
and furniture that happened to be in that area. Unfortunately, we didn't really get a chance to go because it started to storm. But we knew it was there. All right. So, like, and but which all of that really kind of was kind of like a culture shock to me, because my understanding of Amish communities were, a rejection of technology, a rejection of, Western ideals, and being more of an insular community.
Mm.
But of course, like I said, like, I was, and still am, quite ignorant of these, when it comes to, conversations around this. And I mean, especially how, even though, like, I knew that majority of these particular communities were white,
Mhm.
but I did not know how pervasive the idea of colorism and racism had to run so deeply to the point where they, even though that like Bree, you were brought into the community, you from jump were very much so overtly shown that
Mhm.
you
Absolutely.
are different. and
No doubt
and
about it.
and also Fee, you actually witnessing this and actually been curious enough to do the research
Mhm.
on how a lot of these particular ideas formed
Mhm.
and were propagated.
Yeah, I want to get to the root, baby. Don't play with me. I'm like, oh, y'all were able to treat me this way. I'm gonna figure out why.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, to be honest, like you guys remind me of when I started to do more research in the socioeconomic standing of African Americans in the United States, because I did not understand why the wealth gap persisted. I did not
Mhm.
understand why our communities in a lot of ways were less resourced than white communities.
Mhm.
And I mean, like, and I had a very rudimentary understanding of like the civil rights movement, and I knew about slavery, but I did not know how it wasn't just about racial animus. It had to do with laws and systems and organizations that very
Mhm.
much so were pervasive and lasted a very long time, to the point where
Right.
it disenfranchised African Americans, to the point where Fee, you were talking about how in the counties that you know happen to be part of, and like your ancestor was able to pass down land to from
Mm.
generation to generation to generation in order to accrue generational wealth.
Mm.
Well, you know, that's something largely that African Americans were not able to do. You know, they were denied. Redlining was a thing. You know, we can't even imagine like all the different towns that happen to be, you know, predominantly African American were either like burned or, you know, put underwater. There was lynching, there was land theft. I mean, like, you know, and a lot of these particular practices that we thought were long gone or was like written out of law in 1964 in a lot of ways persist to this very day.
Mm.
So you know so it's kind of like, okay, oh, now I know, right? Because like, you know, I had the, you know, the opportunity to read and to listen to people who happen to be more learned about these subject matters than I
Mhm.
am. And I'm always very curious about like how other communities interacting with, you know, African Americans in some shape, way, or form, why some of the behaviors and actions are present.
Mhm.
So, you know, really just like having these particular conversations is just very rich, and I'm very, very grateful that you guys are here. I just really want you guys to know that. So
Thank you. I feel like we barely got into it either, and that's
I
the crazy part.
well, I mean, like, you know, unfortunately, like the show is not, you know, super long, but you know, and I mean, like, to be honest, like this is uh this is like, you know, something that is a conversation that more than likely needs like several parts, to be honest with you.
A
I
thousand
mean,
percent.
yeah,
I'm
I do a series of I do a series of like, you know, protest songs with Mandisa Thomas from the Black Non-Believers. I really feel like I'm gonna have to bring you guys back, to be
I
honest
would
with you.
love that. It would be my honor, truly.
Yeah,
Tell me what you
I
need.
yeah, I really I do. Like, well, I'll be in touch. But you know, guys, I mean, because like, you know, we do have roughly about 15 minutes left, and you know, as my lovely executive producer is reminding me, hard stop at 7:30, Cynthia. So shut up. And I got you, buddy. I got you. But you know, I really wanted both of you to kind of give us like, you know, what, you know, like the call to action, or the or what ideas do you want to spread to people who happen to grown grown up outside of these communities, and what you really want to be the takeaway points for them to be able to hold on to. Fee, you go, and then Bree, I'd like you to go.
I mean, number one, I would like for people to, instead of believing everything they see on TV or everything they read in
Mhm.
some Amish romance novels, or when they listen to the comedian who decided to portray Amish life and culture as an idyllic place for autistic people, when I'm here to tell you that's not true, maybe actually go listen to the recorded and documented experiences of actually autistic Amish people.
Mhm.
Part of the problem that we have is this romanticized narrative about Amish people. And when you start talking about Amish people, they're a very diverse people group, if you will,
Mm.
as much as you can be with all these white people in it, okay? Um, but with that being said, I want you to understand that, one person may have one experience and another person may have another experience, but the collective perspective is what makes up the norms for that specific group. There are certain things that are inherently true about Amish people, and that is typically they have very strict gender roles, for example.
Mm.
Typically,
Mm-hmm.
very, very strict gender roles. And even the way that women's bodies are governed is very
Mhm.
controlling and confining. It felt like I was suffocating in that. So maybe the next time you see some wonderful TV show that you want to go ask your non practicing Amish friend about, maybe stop and think about it. Maybe I can go inform myself about actual Amish life experiences as opposed to watching some fictional depiction that is
Mhm.
scripted and made up, and it isn't reality. Why are you measuring the validity of our life experiences based on fiction?
Yeah.
Why?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Can you do better? As I always say, when you talk about Maya Angelou, what she said is when you know better, do better. So
All
my
Mhm.
right.
challenge for you, if you were never Amish or Anabaptist of any kind, is for you to go find the documented life experiences of actually Amish and
Mhm.
Anabaptist lives rather than buying what they're selling you on TLC this week or next week or
Mhm.
next year, or whatever Amish romance novels they're selling you tomorrow at the Walmart.
Mm. Take that
They,
Walmart and take that TLC. How about that?
Mm. Mm-mm-mm.
And if you're somebody still in the church and you're listening to this, I would invite you to be curious, reach
Mhm.
out, know that there are people who care. You're not alone. And if
Mhm.
you want to live a life that is something that you can be happy with, you deserve that. You are good enough. You are good enough to be able to eat without having to struggle for food, to put food on the table, or to struggle to have water, or even clothing for your kids. Like you are good enough.
Mhm.
Mm.
And there are people who care and they will help you.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for me, just to add to, because I feel like I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you, Misfit. So adding to that through the lens of being an adoptee into all of this, right? I think my encouragement to everyone listening or who might listen to this in the future is what I shared isn't just a story, right? Like this is actually my real lived experience. And I think it's a reality that a lot of people don't see because it doesn't fit the narrative that one they like to see come with adoption, but then you pair that with the heavily romanticized view that people have of Amish and Mennonites. I feel like it was a double whammy, when I don't know. And, people hear adoption and they think rescue, they think safety, they think all of the good things, they think a better life. And again, pair that with adopting a kid into the Amish and Mennonites, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
what I have to say is they don't see the hours of confusion, of being silenced, of trying to make sense of who you are in a place that doesn't reflect you, and for some of us the hours of harm that no one questioned because everyone assumed we were already quote saved, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I say what happened to me didn't happen in isolation. It happened inside of a system, inside of a culture, inside of a structure that wasn't built to question itself, right? And so I guess my call to action would be stop treating adoption like a guaranteed good ending. Start
Mm.
asking what happens after the placement. Start asking who is holding these systems accountable. Start asking whether the child's identity, safety, and voice are actually being protected or just assumed. And then obviously, if you're someone who cares about kids, that applies to you. I think it's pretty easy. Yeah.
Well, well, boom. There you go. Uh,
Too easy, Bree. You remind me of my drill sergeant. Too easy, Private. Okay, my bad. I had to do it.
That's
Oh
hilarious.
God. No, it was no that was great. Guys, yes, I definitely feel like that this is a continuing conversation that needs to be had. I mean, like, I appreciate both of you all being here to really give these perspectives, going into the history of, the Anabaptist. And from what I read, these are communities that originally came from around like Germany and the Netherlands. Is that correct?
So, I actually know what country my ancestor immigrated from. So we specifically came from we're Swiss German.
Which West German?
Swiss
Swiss
Swiss.
West Germany. Okay.
Yeah.
Swiss West German.
We're
Okay.
Swiss German, but Anabaptists themselves, the confessions of faith, for example, they were written in Dordrecht, Holland.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I know that there are Anabaptists in Poland, there's Anabaptists in Ukraine, I believe. Oh yeah, the Russian Mennonites, which let me give you all a real quick thing. So when we say Bree was Amish Mennonite,
Mm-hmm.
there are many different types of plain people. Just because you see a plain group does not mean that they're
Mhm.
Amish or Mennonite.
Right. Right.
Anybody can live a plain life. They can be an atheist and live a plain life.
I feel like I should
But
preface with this, honestly. Yeah.
Amish Mennonites are a specific subgroup that incorporate values, tradition, and theology from both Amish and Mennonite communities.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you for clearing that up for us.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
yeah, so like so it's definitely understood like how, like, these particular communities can actually come from these particular countries, mostly in, like, the European areas, experience their own, from what I've read, like their own like persecution for being Anabaptists, and then, say, hey, come to America, everything's cool. Oh, by the by, you want to go ahead and take that land from, some of those indigenous groups. It's really okay. um
Okay, so when they slaughtered indigenous people to
yeah,
take their land and there was homesteading and all this stuff, so that was
yeah.
that was okay, but we didn't participate in that. Or when they fed the soldiers, when they fed the
Mm,
soldiers from the south, or even just soldiers that owned slaves or believed in the right to own slaves, like
yeah.
when they fed those soldiers, would you say they weren't participating in the Civil War? I have questions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly where we are going to pick up from the next time that we are having this conversation, because I know already that my executive producer is having an aneurysm as we speak right now.
Oh,
So so
thank you.
everybody, thank you, Misfit. Thank you, Bree, thank you so much for being here on the Roots Matter. This was a very rich conversation, and I know that we only touched the surface. Like I said, that we are going to definitely have to come up with a date where we bring both of you back, and so that we can, get into some more of the weeds of all that is part of Amish life concerning the entire American colonialism story. So, guys, I just want to say also, for everyone who actually joined us today, thank you so much for coming to the Roots Matter and actually participating in the conversation. Thank you, everybody that's in the chat that actually contributed to the conversation as well. We appreciate it. Guys, again, I'm just going to go ahead and just tell you again to like this video, share it on your social media platforms, comment below about what you thought about the show. Even if you all have like some additional, like, questions or things of that nature, please go ahead and put those in the comment section as well. And then also make sure that you all, if you really do like the content on the Roots Matter, we do have a Patreon here. If you go to www.patreon.com/cam glamming, you can start off supporting the show and what we do for as little as $1 to $3 a month. Now, next week, guys, I usually do my lives every 2 weeks. then in the next 2 weeks, I'm actually going to be on the Skeptic Haven channel to do a call-in show. So guys, make sure that you all are subscribing to the Skeptic Haven channel so that you can go ahead and get notification when they're going to be live and doing that particular show. So more than likely, I'm going to be doing it live next week. Haha, just told you, executive producer. Get deal. And I'm going to have a wonderful person, Deanna Williams, who has started their new channel called Coup Films, where they are actually showing uh, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who happen to be also partly from the queer community as well in film. So we're going to go ahead and talk to them next week. I'm really super excited about that. They do have like trailers and some videos up now. So if you guys go to YouTube to Coup Films, that's KEW Films, go ahead and please subscribe to that channel right now. So as I like to always say to everybody who happens to be here, because we about to wrap this bad boy up, make sure that you, dear viewer, stay grounded, stay hydrated, stay aware, and at the end of the day, remember the roots matter. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye.